I never imagined that a simple manila envelope could shatter the very foundation of who I thought I was. Birthdays are supposed to be days filled with laughter, balloons, and maybe a cake topped with flickering candles. They're meant to be a celebration of existence, a reminder that you're loved enough for people to gather around you and mark another year of your life. But on my 35th birthday, instead of balloons, I was given the sharp edge of truth, and it came wrapped not in ribbons, but in silence so heavy I could barely breathe. My name is Olivia. I'm a 35-year-old woman who has always believed that family, though complicated, was my anchor. I had grown up in a small town in Ohio, in a modest 2-story house with a white porch swing that squeaked every time someone sat on it. My childhood, at least from the outside, looked like the picture of stability. My father, a quiet mechanic who rarely raised his voice, and my mother, a woman whose soft-spoken demeanor made people call her gentle, were the foundation of my life. I had one younger brother, Jason, who was the golden boy in everyone's eyes. And me, well, I was the dutiful daughter, not perfect, not outstanding, but always present, always there. But birthdays had never been easy in my family. My mother wasn't the type to throw parties or fuss over decorations. Still, she never forgot. A small cake, maybe a card with her looping handwriting. That was enough. Except this year was different. I came over to her house expecting the usual, maybe coffee brewed too strong, and a small gesture of love. Instead, I walked into a living room where the curtains were drawn tight, as if the sunlight itself had been forbidden entry. My mother sat in her armchair, her hands folded, an envelope resting on her lap. Her expression wasn't warm or celebratory. It was guarded, almost resigned, like a prisoner waiting for her sentence to be read. "Sit down, Olivia," she said. Her voice carried an unusual weight, one that made me hesitate. I sat, confused, my palms clammy. "What is this?" I asked, glancing at the envelope. Her fingers lingered on it before she slid it across the coffee table to me. "This is my gift to you. I should have told you years ago, but I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was protecting myself. But I can't hold it anymore. You deserve the truth." I remember the texture of the envelope against my hands, smooth, yet trembling from the grip of my own fingers. I pulled out the folded papers and saw the header DNA analysis. For a moment, my mind couldn't process it. It was like reading a foreign language. My eyes scanned the words, the percentages, the names. And then it clicked. My father wasn't my father. The room swayed. The floor beneath me felt like it had dissolved into air. I looked up at my mother, desperate for her to laugh, to tell me this was some cruel joke. But her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. No denial, no correction. Just the heavy truth sitting between us. "You knew," I whispered. My voice cracked. But she nodded. "Yes, Olivia. I knew, and I should have told you long ago. But I was afraid you'd hate me. I told myself it didn't matter, that he raised you as his own, that love was enough. But secrets rot, and this one has been eating me alive." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl the papers across the room, to demand she take it all back. But the words on that page were carved into me now, permanent, and irreversible. I thought of my father, of the way he used to tuck me in at night, the way he taught me how to change a flat tire, the way he looked at me with quiet pride at my high school graduation. And now, in one crushing moment, I was being told that his blood didn't run through my veins, that my life had been built on a lie. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence like glass breaking. My mother's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place: fear, shame, regret. "Someone from my past. Before your father and I married. He doesn't know about you. He never did." The words struck me harder than I expected. He never knew about me. Not only had my father not been mine, but the man who was had been robbed of the chance to even know I existed. And I had been robbed of the chance to know him. I stood up, pacing the room, my hands trembling. "All these years, you let me live a lie. Do you understand what you've done to me, to us, to him?" My mother reached for me, but I pulled back. Her touch, once a comfort, now felt foreign. "Olivia, I was young. I was scared. And when your father, when the man you call Dad, stepped in and accepted me, I thought it was fate. He loved you like his own. He loved me," I said bitterly. "And now he's gone. And I can't even look him in the eyes and thank him. I can't tell him that even if we didn't share blood, he was my father in every way that mattered. You took that from me. You stole my chance to tell him the truth." Tears blurred my vision, and I collapsed back onto the couch. The envelope crumpled in my fists. My mother wept silently across from me, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her, not when my entire identity had been ripped apart. That night, I drove home in silence. My husband, Daniel, asked me how the visit had gone, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I went to bed clutching the DNA results like they were both a weapon and a wound. In the days that followed, I withdrew from everyone. I stopped answering Jason's calls. I avoided my mother's texts, her voicemails where she begged me to talk. At work, I plastered on a mask of normalcy, but inside, I was unraveling. Every reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Whose eyes were these? Whose mouth? Whose blood was pulsing in my veins? The betrayal festered, and with it came questions that clawed at me day and night. Who was my real father? Why had my mother chosen to hide him from me? And what would happen if I found him? One evening, when my husband noticed I hadn't touched my dinner, he finally pressed me. "Olivia, something's wrong. I can see it. You have to tell me." So I did. I poured everything out the envelope, the DNA results, the truth about my father. His face shifted between shock, sympathy, and anger. "I can't believe she did this to you," he said softly, taking my hand. "But maybe you need answers. Maybe you need to find him." The thought terrified me, yet it also ignited something deep within, a need for truth, for closure, for revenge. Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but in reclaiming the power that had been stolen from me through silence and lies. I started digging. quietly at first. Old photographs, yearbooks, whispered questions to neighbors who had lived in our town long enough to remember my mother's youth. Patterns began to emerge, names I had never heard before, fragments of a story that had been buried under decades of denial. The more I uncovered, the more I realized my mother hadn't just lied about my father. She had erased him. It was as if she had cut him out of existence, locking away every memory, every trace. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt deliberate. Not fear, not shame, control. The first real lead came from Mrs. Green, an elderly neighbor who had lived across the street since before I was born. "Your mother," she said, her voice hushed but sharp, "was once engaged to a man named Richard Hale. Charming fellow, from a wealthy family. But it ended abruptly. She married your father not long after." Richard Hale. The name echoed in my mind, heavy and unfamiliar, yet tethered to me by blood. I went home and searched every corner of the internet. Richard Hale, now a retired lawyer living 3 towns over. Married once, divorced, no children listed. I stared at his photograph on a faded alumni website. His face was stern, weathered, but in the arch of his brows, in the sharp line of his jaw, I saw something disturbingly familiar. For hours, I sat frozen, comparing his photo to my own reflection. The resemblance was undeniable. I had found him, my real father, and with that discovery, a storm began brewing inside me. Because knowing his name wasn't enough, I needed to confront him. I needed to know if he had ever wondered about me, and above all, I needed to know why my mother had kept me from him all these years. But with each step closer to the truth, I knew there would be consequences. Buried secrets never rise without dragging everything around them into chaos. The days after I discovered Richard Hale's name stretched into long, restless nights. I would wake up at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. The photo I had found of him was printed out and tucked into the drawer of my nightstand. Yet sometimes I would take it out and study it, running my fingers over the paper as though it could reveal hidden truths. His features haunted me the way his eyes seemed familiar, almost as if they were my own reflected back at me through time. But every time I looked at that picture, another face would come to mind: my father, the man who raised me, his weathered hands, calloused from years of fixing cars, the smell of motor oil clinging to his shirts, the way his tired eyes would light up when I showed him a good grade or told him about a new job. Blood or not, he had been my father. And yet, my mother's lie had stolen even that simple comfort. She had poisoned my memories with doubt. Finally, after weeks of torment, I made the decision. I would meet Richard. I couldn't move forward without hearing his side, without looking him in the eye and asking why he had never searched for me, why he had never fought for me. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't owe her that. She had forfeited her right to control my choices when she handed me that envelope. Instead, I told my husband, Daniel. He was hesitant. "Olivia, are you sure this is the right thing? What if he rejects you? What if it only brings more pain? I need to know." I told him, my voice firmer than I felt inside. I've lived my entire life on half-truths. I deserve the whole story. The next week, I drove to the neighboring town where Richard lived. My palms were slick with sweat as I parked outside his home, a sprawling brick house with white shutters and a well-manicured lawn. It wasn't ostentatious, but it carried the quiet air of wealth, the kind of life my mother had never had. I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes, debating whether I should turn back. My heart thumped so loudly I thought it might burst. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage, I got out and walked up the path. When the door opened, the man standing there was older than the photo I had studied. His hair was almost completely gray, his face deeply lined, but his posture was still strong. For a moment, he looked at me with polite curiosity. No recognition. "Can I help you?" he asked. My throat tightened. "My name is Olivia Bennett." I hesitated, then added, "I think you might be my father." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. His expression flickered confusion, disbelief, something I couldn't quite place. He stepped back, motioning for me to come inside. We sat in his living room, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he said, "Why do you think that?" I pulled out the DNA results, the photograph of him I had printed, my mother's letter confessing what she had done. He read through them, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. "I never knew," he whispered. "Your mother never told me. I swear to you, Olivia, if I had known, I would have been there. I would have fought for you." My breath caught in my throat. The sincerity in his voice, the way his hands trembled as he clutched the papers, it didn't feel like a lie. Still, I had been lied to before. "You expect me to believe you?" I asked bitterly. "All these years, and you never once suspected, never once thought about me." His eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them, they were filled with regret. "I loved your mother once, deeply, but our families, they didn't approve. She ended things quickly. A few months later, she was married to the man you grew up calling your father. I thought she had moved on. I never imagined." The room spun. My mother hadn't just lied to me, she had made a choice. She had chosen silence over truth, control over honesty. She had built a life with one man while erasing another completely, and in that erasure, she had taken away my choice, my right to know who I was. Richard leaned forward, his voice trembling. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a place in your life. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to know you. Even now, after all these years," I stared at him, torn between fury and longing. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to blame him for the emptiness in my chest. Another part, the lonely child who had always wondered why she never quite fit, wanted to reach across the divide and grasp his hand. "I don't know," I admitted softly. "I don't know what I can give you." "That's fair," he said, his voice thick. "Take your time. But know this, you were never unwanted. You were never a mistake. The mistake was in the lies that kept us apart." Those words cracked something inside me. For the first time since opening that envelope, I felt a flicker of validation. I wasn't just the byproduct of betrayal. I was a person who should have been loved, acknowledged, cherished. Still, leaving his house that evening, I felt no peace. Instead, a new anger began to burn. My mother had stolen from me not just the truth, but decades of a relationship I might have had with the man who helped bring me into this world. And for what? To protect her pride, to keep up appearances. The next time I saw her, I confronted her. I went to her house, DNA results in hand, Richard's name heavy on my tongue. You lied to me. I spat the moment I walked in. You didn't just keep a secret, you stole my life from me. Her face crumpled, but I was too angry to care. Olivia, please. You don't understand. Don't tell me I don't understand. I shouted, my voice breaking. I went to him. I met him. And do you know what he said? He said he didn't even know I existed because you never told him. You chose to erase him. You chose to erase me. Her sobs filled the room, but I stood there, shaking with rage. For once, I didn't comfort her. I didn't soften my voice. She needed to feel the weight of what she had done. Why, I demanded, why would you do this to me, to him? She sank into her chair, her hands covering her face. Because I was scared. Because Richard came from money, from a family who looked down on me. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought he would abandon me or worse, that his family would take you away from me. And then your father. He offered me stability. He promised me he would raise you as his own. And I thought that was enough. Enough for who I hissed. For you. Because it wasn't enough for me. I lived my entire life not knowing who I was. And now it's too late. 35 years, gone. Do you understand that? She reached for me, but I pulled back. Her touch felt like fire against my skin. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice breaking. I don't even know if I want to. Her sobs followed me out the door, echoing in my ears long after I drove away. In the weeks that followed, my life became a storm of conflicting emotions. I met Richard again, slowly allowing him into my life. We shared long conversations, awkward at first, then more natural as time went on. He told me about his childhood, his failed marriage, his regrets. I told him about my life, my career, my marriage, the father I thought was mine. We began to piece together a connection, fragile yet undeniable, but with every step closer to him, I felt the rift between me and my mother widening. I ignored her calls, her letters. Jason grew angry, accusing me of being cruel. She did what she thought was best, he said. She lied. I snapped. She built our entire lives on a lie. Don't you dare ask me to excuse that. But even as I said it, guilt gnawed at me. She was still my mother. The woman who had raised me, who had wiped my tears and held me when I was sick. Yet now, every memory felt tainted. The bitterness inside me grew darker. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was a thirst for something I couldn't quite name. Justice, revenge. I wanted her to feel the emptiness I felt, the betrayal that consumed me. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Because secrets never exist in isolation. And my mother's lies, once unearthed, had begun unraveling more than just my identity. They were pulling at the threads of our entire family, threatening to expose truths none of us were ready for. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a battlefield littered with hidden mines. Every conversation with my mother was an explosion waiting to happen, and every silence between us was just as dangerous. Jason kept pressing me to reconcile. But how could I reconcile when every time I looked at her, all I saw was the thief of my truth? Still, I couldn't deny the pull inside me, the conflicted ache that whispered she was still my mother. Betrayal and love wrestled inside me, neither fully winning. But something darker began to grow in me, the thought that maybe she didn't just hide one truth. Maybe there was more. It was Richard who first voiced the suspicion I had been too afraid to consider. We were sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Olivia, I have to tell you something. When your mother ended things with me, it wasn't just sudden, it was strange. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She cut me off completely, blocked every attempt I made to speak with her. It wasn't like her. I always suspected there was more to the story. Something she never told me." His words ignited something in me, a fire that burned through the fog of my anger. If she had lied once, what was stopping her from lying again? What other pieces of my life had she twisted to suit her own narrative? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart thudding with dread and determination. Finally, at 3 a.m., I got up and drove to her house. She still lived in the same home where I'd grown up, the place that now felt like a mausoleum of secrets. Her spare key was still hidden under the loose brick on the porch. I let myself in, the silence of the house pressing against me. The smell of lavender and old wood wrapped around me, achingly familiar. But I pushed the nostalgia away. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for the truth. I went straight to her bedroom, to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. It had always been locked, always off limits. But I had learned to pick simple locks back in college when I lived with a roommate who constantly locked herself out of her trunk. My fingers trembled as I worked, but the click came quickly. Inside were neat stacks of old photographs, yellowed letters tied with ribbon, and journals with cracked spines. My breath caught as I reached for the journals. My mother had always been a private woman, but if she had confessed to me once, perhaps these pages held the confessions she had never dared to speak aloud. The first journal I opened was from the year I was born. The entries were scattered, but the words made my blood run cold. I don't know if I'm making the right choice. Richard doesn't know about the baby. I can't tell him I won't risk losing her. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm being selfish. What if one day she finds out? What if she hates me for it? I turned the page, my hands shaking. David has been so kind. He doesn't question. He says he'll love her as his own. I should be grateful. But when I look at her tiny face, I see Richard's eyes. And every time I see them, I'm reminded of what I've stolen from him, from her, from all of us. Tears blurred the ink as I read. My mother had known, even then, that the lie was a ticking time bomb. She had written her guilt into these pages, but she had kept living the lie anyway. And then, deeper in the chest, I found something that made my stomach twist. A letter, unopened, addressed to her in Richard's handwriting, dated just months after she had married my father. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Margaret, please. I don't know what I did wrong. I just need to see you, to understand. You disappeared from my life overnight, and I can't believe you would do this without reason. If you're in trouble, let me help you. If you don't want me anymore, I'll accept it, but I need to know the truth. Please, meet me. Just once. Richard. My chest heaved. She hadn't just hidden me from him, she had shut him out entirely, erasing him as if he had never existed. The anger that surged through me was almost blinding. My mother had painted herself as a scared, helpless young woman, but the evidence in front of me told another story. She had made deliberate choices. She had built walls around her secrets and left the rest of us to live in their shadow. I left the house before dawn, the journals and letters clutched to my chest. I felt like a thief, but I didn't care. They were mine, my stolen history, my stolen life. When I confronted her later that day, she froze the moment she saw the journals in my arms. Her face drained of color. You went through my things, she whispered, horror in her voice. Yes, I said, my voice trembling with fury. And I found the truth you buried. You didn't just lie to me, you lied to him, too. He begged you for answers, and you shut him out. You robbed me of a father who wanted me. Her knees buckled, and she sank into her chair. Olivia, please. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me, I spat. Don't you dare use that word. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself, your pride, your fear, your precious little world. And you destroyed mine. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not sadness, not guilt, but fear. She realized she was losing me. And maybe she realized she deserved to, but what she didn't know was that my anger wasn't done growing. Because now that I had uncovered her lies, I wanted her to face them not just with me, but with everyone. That Sunday, I invited Richard to meet Jason. My brother had no idea what was coming. He showed up at my house expecting a casual dinner, only to find a stranger sitting at the table. Jason, I said, my voice steady though my heart was pounding. This is Richard Hale, my biological father. Jason's face paled. He looked at Richard, then at me, then back again. What the hell are you talking about? So I told him. Everything. The DNA results. The journals. The letters. Jason's hands shook as he listened, his face twisting with disbelief and anger. When I finished, the silence was suffocating. Finally, he slammed his fist against the table. She lied to us, our whole lives. She lied. Yes, I said softly, and it's time she answers for it. The plan that began forming in my mind wasn't noble. It wasn't forgiving. It was raw, fueled by betrayal. If she had spent her life weaving lies, then I would unravel them in the most public way possible. Jason resisted at first, torn between loyalty and fury. But in the end, he agreed. He felt the same wound I did, even if he tried to hide it. The next week, I arranged a family gathering at my mother's house. She thought it was for my belated birthday celebration. She greeted us with cautious smiles, her eyes red from crying. She had no idea what was coming. When everyone was seated, Jason, my husband, Richard, even a few cousins, I pulled out the journals and the DNA results. I laid them on the table in front of her. Her face went white. "Olivia, what are you doing?" "I'm giving everyone the truth," I said, my voice clear and cutting. "Since you refused to." Gasps rippled through the room as I explained. Every detail, every lie, every stolen moment. My mother sobbed openly, begging me to stop, but I didn't. I couldn't. The truth poured out of me like poison finally released, burning everything in its path. When I finished, the room was silent. My mother was collapsed in her chair, trembling. Jason couldn't even look at her. Richard sat stiffly, his jaw tight, and in that silence, I felt a grim satisfaction. For once, she wasn't in control. For once, the truth was louder than her lies. But revenge, I learned, is never clean. The satisfaction was fleeting, replaced quickly by an emptiness that hollowed me out. I had exposed her, yes, but in doing so, I had shattered what little was left of our family. And deep down, a part of me still wondered if the price was too high. The silence after I revealed everything was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the kind of silence that settles when people run out of words. It was the heavy, suffocating kind, thick with judgment and grief. My mother sat slumped in her chair, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling on the table. The people who once admired her for her grace and quiet dignity now looked at her as though they didn't recognize her at all. Jason's voice broke the silence. "You lied to us, Mom. Our whole lives you lied. How could you?" His words were raw, unfiltered. My mother reached for him, but he pulled back, his jaw tight. "Jason, please." I did what I thought was right. "No," he snapped. "You did what was right for you. Not for us. Not for Dad. And certainly not for Olivia." I thought I would feel triumphant hearing him say that, as if my pain had finally been validated. But instead, the emptiness inside me deepened. This wasn't vindication. It was destruction, and I had set it in motion. Richard sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor, his face unreadable. I knew he was processing decades of loss in real time, the stolen years he could never reclaim. My cousins whispered to each other, their gazes darting between me and my mother, unsure of what to do. Finally, my mother looked at me. Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "You wanted the truth to come out, Olivia. Well, now it has. I hope it brings you peace." But there was no peace in her words, only defeat. I couldn't stay any longer. I gathered the journals and the DNA results, the evidence of our fractured family, and walked out. Daniel followed me, his hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. My heart was numb. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the look on my mother's face. Not just her guilt, but her devastation. for all the pain she had caused me, for all the lies she had told. She was still the woman who had raised me, who had sung lullabies to me when I was sick, who had sat through endless school recitals just to clap the loudest. And I had destroyed her in front of everyone. For days, I couldn't bring myself to call her. Jason avoided her completely. Richard, surprisingly, reached out to me. He wanted to see me again, to begin building some kind of relationship. I agreed, though a part of me felt guilty, as though I was betraying the man who raised me. Over coffee one morning, Richard looked at me with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Olivia, you've carried a heavy burden. I can't undo the past, but I want to be here now, if you'll let me. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. I want that too, but it feels like everything else is falling apart. Sometimes, he said softly, things have to break before they can be rebuilt. But you can choose what you build. You don't have to carry your mother's mistakes forever. His words stayed with me. I began to see that revenge had only deepened my wounds. The truth had freed me, yes, but it had also chained me to anger and bitterness. And if I wasn't careful, I would spend the rest of my life defined by what my mother had done, instead of who I chose to become. One evening, I finally went back to my mother's house. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When she opened the door, her eyes were swollen, her face pale. Olivia, she whispered, as though she hadn't expected me to come. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had once braided my hair for school, where she had taught me how to bake cookies. Now it felt like a battleground. I hated you, I admitted, my voice breaking. When you gave me that envelope, I thought you had ruined me. And maybe, in some ways, you did. But I also realized that holding onto this hatred will ruin me more. She cried silently, nodding. I deserve your hatred. I deserve worse. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who lied, but the woman who had lived with her own torment for decades. The journals I had read weren't just confessions. They were cries for help she had never dared to speak. I can't forget what you did, I said, and I don't know if I can forgive you, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life defined by this. I need to move forward. For me, her tears fell harder, but she whispered, that's all I could ever hope for. We didn't hug. We didn't suddenly heal decades of lies in one conversation, but we found something fragile, a possibility that maybe, one day, forgiveness could grow in the cracks of our brokenness. Months passed. My relationship with Richard grew cautiously stronger. We weren't father and daughter in the traditional sense. We couldn't erase the years we lost, but we found comfort in small things. A shared sense of humor. The way we both liked our coffee black. The unmistakable similarities in our temperaments. Every time I saw him, I felt both grief for what was lost and gratitude for what was finally found. Jason struggled more. His loyalty to our mother was fractured, and though he tried to shield her from his anger, the distance between them was undeniable. I often wondered if exposing the truth had cost him more than it had cost me. As for my mother, she remained a shadow of herself. But slowly, we began to speak again. Not about the past that was too raw, too jagged, but about the present. Small things, The weather, my work, her garden. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the DNA results weren't just a revelation of betrayal. They were also an invitation to redefine who I was, not by bloodlines or lies, but by choice. On my next birthday, I sat quietly with a small cake, a single candle flickering in the dim light of my kitchen. My husband sat beside me, Richard across the table. My mother wasn't there, she couldn't be. Not yet, but I knew she was thinking of me. As I closed my eyes to make a wish, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't wishing for the past to be different. I was wishing for the strength to build a future where truth, however painful, would guide me forward. Because in the end, betrayal may shatter you, but it also forces you to choose what you'll do with the pieces. Will you cut yourself on them forever? Or will you build something new? That was the lesson I carried from it all. The truth can devastate, but it can also liberate. And forgiveness, though it may never erase the wounds, is the only way to stop them from festering. So if you're listening to my story, maybe you've faced betrayal too. Maybe you've carried secrets that weren't yours to bear. Or maybe you've been the one keeping them. Whatever your role, remember this: lies might protect us for a time, but they will always cost more in the end. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts, and decide what kind of life we'll build from there. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, subscribe to stay connected. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of the truths that live in your heart.